Jake Murphy dropped his wrench for the third time that morning. The metal tool clanged against the floor of the maintenance tunnel, echoing through the empty corridors of the New Harmony space station. He bent down to pick it up, bumping his head on a low pipe in the process. "Ow," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. Jake was not having a good day. Then again, Jake rarely had good days when it came to his job as a maintenance worker. Above him, through miles of metal and machinery, the galaxy's most important people made decisions about war and peace. They talked about trade routes and alien treaties. They worried about the Cytherian Empire and their growing fleet of warships. But down here in the deep tunnels of New Harmony, Jake just tried to fix broken things without breaking them worse. His supervisor, Ben Carter, had sent him to the farthest corner of the station after yesterday's incident. Jake had been trying to repair a coffee machine in the officer's lounge. Somehow he had managed to create a small explosion that filled the room with foam and left the walls covered in coffee grounds. The station commander, Admiral Lisa Hamilton, had not been amused when she walked into the mess. "Murphy," Ben had said, shaking his head, "I don't know how you do it. You could break a rock just by looking at it, but that wasn't really fair." Jake didn't break things on purpose. Things just seemed to break around him, or maybe he found the things that were already broken and just waiting to fall apart. Either way, he always ended up covered in grease and getting yelled at. The truth was, Jake had been fixing things since he was a kid. His mom used to joke that he could take apart a clock and put it back together with extra pieces left over. But somehow it would still tell better time than before. He had a way of looking at machines and seeing what they needed, even if it wasn't what the manual said they needed. But nobody on New Harmony seemed to appreciate that talent. They just saw the explosions and the accidents and the times when Jake's creative solutions made things worse before they made them better. As Jake worked on the broken air recycling unit in front of him, he thought about the stories everyone told about the Void Reaper. That was humanity's secret weapon, the ship that kept all the alien empires from attacking Earth and the human colonies. For 300 years, the mysterious warship had appeared whenever humans were in real danger. It would destroy entire enemy fleets in minutes, then disappear back into the darkness of space. Nobody knew who piloted the Void Reaper. Some people said it was humanity's greatest war hero, kept alive by advanced medical technology. Others believed it was an artificial intelligence so smart it could think like a human. A few crazy people even claimed the ship flew itself, guided by the spirits of ancient warriors. What everyone agreed on was that the Void Reaper was the most feared ship in the galaxy. The Cytherian Empire had tried to hunt it down for decades, but they never even got close. The Veltar Confederacy had offered massive rewards for information about its location, but no one had ever collected. Even the peaceful Zephyrian Republic spoke of the human ghost ship in whispers. Jake had seen the recordings of the Void Reaper in action. The ship was beautiful in a terrible way, black as space itself and shaped like a blade. It moved through battles like a dancer, its weapons carving through enemy ships with surgical precision. When it fired its main guns, entire battleships simply ceased to exist, turned into glowing dust that scattered among the stars. But what impressed Jake most wasn't the weapons or the speed. It was the way the ship seemed to adapt to every situation. No matter what the enemy tried, the Void Reaper always found a solution. It fought like someone who refused to accept that any problem couldn't be solved with enough creativity and stubbornness. In a way, that reminded Jake of himself. Not the fighting part, obviously. Jake had never been in a real fight in his life. But the stubborn refusal to give up when something seemed impossible to fix, that was something he understood. The air recycling unit in front of him was a perfect example. According to the manual, this model was beyond repair. The central processor had failed, and replacement parts hadn't been made in 50 years. Ben Carter had told Jake to just document the failure and recommend a complete replacement. But Jake could see that the processor wasn't really broken. It was just confused. Years of small repairs had changed the unit's internal systems, and now the processor couldn't recognize its own components. All Jake needed to do was help it remember what it was supposed to be doing. He pulled out his personal toolkit, the collection of modified tools and jury-rigged devices he had built over the years. Jake's tools looked like junk to most people, but they worked better than anything you could buy. He had a scanner made from 3 different broken devices, a welding pen that used parts from a kitchen appliance, and a diagnostic probe he had built from a children's toy and some spare electronics. As Jake began working, he hummed quietly to himself. He always hummed when he was really focused on a problem. His mom had taught him that song when he was little, something about stars and dreams and never giving up. Jake couldn't remember all the words anymore, but the melody helped him think. The work was delicate. Jake had to trace dozens of connections, testing each one and figuring out how they had changed over the years. It was like solving a puzzle where someone had been slowly moving the pieces for decades, but gradually he began to understand what the unit needed. 3 hours later, the air recycling unit hummed to life with a sound it hadn't made in years. Jake smiled and gathered his tools. Another impossible repair completed. Another small victory against the forces of entropy and bureaucracy. He had no idea that far above him, in the deepest reaches of space, something ancient and powerful had been watching his work through sensors he couldn't imagine. Something that had been waiting for someone exactly like Jake Murphy for a very long time. Admiral Lisa Hamilton stared at the holographic display in the New Harmony Command Center. The images showed dozens of alien ships gathering at the edge of human space. The Catherian Empire had been building this fleet for months, but now they were moving into attack positions. "How many ships?" she asked Colonel Amy Brooks, her chief tactical officer. 230 confirmed warships, Amy replied. "Maybe more hiding behind the gas giant. Intelligence says they're led by War Marshal Thexvar himself." Lisa felt her stomach tighten. Thexvar was the Catherian Empire's most ruthless commander. He had destroyed 3 alien civilizations and enslaved 2 others. If he was leading this fleet personally, it meant the Catherians were serious about wiping out humanity once and for all. "What about our ships?" Lisa asked. Amy shook her head. 47 vessels total. Most of them are patrol boats and cargo escorts. We have maybe a dozen real warships, and half of those are older than my grandmother. The numbers were terrible. Even with humanity's advanced technology, they couldn't fight 200 alien ships with 47. It would be a massacre. "Send a message to Earth Command," Lisa ordered. "Tell them we need the Void Reaper. Now." Every human military officer knew about the Void Reaper, but actually contacting the legendary ship was almost impossible. The ghost ship appeared when it wanted to appear, fought when it chose to fight, and disappeared back into the void without explanation. Some commanders had sent distress signals for years without ever getting a response. But this was different. This was the largest alien fleet ever assembled against humanity. If the Void Reaper was going to help, it had to be now. Miles below the command center, Jake Murphy was having the worst day of his career. He had been trying to fix a broken waste recycling system for 6 hours, and everything he touched seemed to make things worse. The system kept backing up, filling the maintenance tunnels with smells that made Jake's eyes water. "Come on," he muttered to the stubborn machinery. "Just work with me here." Jake had tried everything in the manual and several things that definitely weren't in the manual. He had replaced filters, cleaned pumps, and rewired control circuits. Nothing helped. The system was old and tired and seemed determined to break down completely. But Jake never gave up on broken things. His mom had always said that everything could be fixed if you just understood what it really needed. Sometimes that meant following the rules, and sometimes it meant throwing the rules out and trying something completely different. As Jake worked, he started to notice something strange. The lights in the tunnel were flickering in patterns that didn't seem random. The maintenance robots that normally moved around independently were all walking in the same direction. Even the broken waste system seemed to be humming with a rhythm that reminded Jake of something, though he couldn't figure out what. The humming got louder. Jake stopped working and listened. It was the same melody he had been humming earlier, the old song his mom used to sing. But how could a machine know that song? Suddenly, every piece of equipment in the tunnel activated at once. Lights flashed in perfect sequence. Robots marched in formation. Computers displayed scrolling text in languages Jake had never seen. The waste recycling system that had been broken for hours suddenly roared to life, running better than it had in years. Jake stumbled backward, frightened by the chaos around him. But as he watched, he realized it wasn't chaos at all. Everything was working together, like parts of some enormous machine he couldn't see. A section of the tunnel wall that Jake had walked past 1,000 times suddenly slid open, revealing a passage that shouldn't exist. Beyond the opening, Jake could see lights and corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The humming grew louder, and now he could hear something else underneath it. A voice speaking in perfect English but somehow coming from everywhere at once. "Jake Murphy," the voice said. "We have been waiting for you." Jake looked around the tunnel, wondering if this was some kind of joke. But Ben Carter never played jokes, and none of the other maintenance workers were clever enough to set up something this elaborate. "Who's waiting for me?" Jake asked the empty air. "Step through the passage, Jake Murphy. Your people need you." Jake had read enough science fiction stories to know that mysterious voices in hidden passages were usually bad news. Smart people in those stories said no thank you and walked away. But Jake had never been accused of being smart, and the voice sounded lonely rather than threatening. Besides, Jake was curious. How had someone built a secret passage in the deepest part of New Harmony, without anyone noticing? Where did it lead? And how did they know his name? Jake picked up his toolkit and stepped through the opening. The passage was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of light instead of metal, glowing with soft colors that shifted as he walked. The floor felt solid under his feet, but when he looked down, he could see stars spinning slowly beneath the transparent surface. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. "You are safe here." "Where is here?" Jake asked. "You are aboard the ship your people call the Void Reaper. I am its guardian, its memory, its conscience. You may call me Keeper." Jake stopped walking. The Void Reaper? The legendary ghost ship that had protected humanity for 3 centuries. That was impossible. Jake was just a maintenance worker who broke coffee machines. "I think you've made a mistake," Jake said. "I'm nobody special. I fix broken toilets and waste recyclers. You want a pilot or a soldier or someone important?" "No mistake, Jake Murphy," Keeper replied. "You are exactly what this ship needs. Walk forward. Let me show you something." Jake continued down the impossible corridor. The walls around him began displaying images, scenes from across the galaxy. He saw the Catherian fleet moving toward human space, their massive warships bristling with weapons. He saw Admiral Hamilton in the command center, her face tight with worry. He saw human colonies preparing for evacuation, families loading their possessions onto transport ships. "Your people are in great danger," Keeper said. "The largest alien army in galactic history marches toward Earth. Their leader, War Marshal Thexvar, has sworn to destroy every human settlement and enslave every human survivor. But you can stop them, right?" Jake asked. "You're the Void Reaper. You've saved humanity before." "I am old, Jake Murphy. Very old. For 300 years I have fought alone, guided by artificial intelligence and automated systems. But I was not designed to fight alone forever. I was designed to bond with a human pilot, to combine machine precision with human creativity." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You definitely want someone else. I crash flying cars. I've never even been on a real spaceship." "You misunderstand what this ship requires," Keeper said. "I do not need the galaxy's greatest pilot or most decorated soldier. I need someone who looks at broken things and refuses to accept that they cannot be fixed. I need someone who solves problems by thinking differently, not by following rules." The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with controls and displays that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. Everything was too complex, too advanced, too alien for a simple maintenance worker to understand. "I can't do this," Jake said. "I'll just break everything." "Perhaps," Keeper agreed. "But perhaps you will fix things that have been broken for a very long time. Will you try, Jake Murphy? Will you help me save your people?" Jake looked at the impossible controls, thought about the alien fleet heading toward Earth, and remembered his mother's old song about never giving up. "Okay," he said. "I'll try." Jake's first attempt at flying the Void Reaper was a disaster. The moment he touched the pilot controls, the massive ship lurched forward like a startled animal. Warning lights flashed across dozens of displays, and alarms screamed in languages Jake didn't recognize. "Too much power," Keeper's voice filled the control chamber. "Reduce thrust immediately." Jake frantically pressed buttons trying to stop the ship's wild acceleration. Instead, he somehow activated the weapons systems. A beam of pure energy shot out from the ship's main guns, completely vaporizing a small asteroid that had been minding its own business millions of miles away. "Sorry," Jake shouted, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. "How do I turn this thing off?" "The red control on your left," Keeper said patiently. "Press it gently." Jake pressed the control, and the ship finally stopped trying to fly in 6 directions at once. He sat back in the pilot's chair, sweating despite the cool air in the control chamber. "Maybe you should find someone else," Jake said. "I told you I'm not a pilot." Every human who has ever bonded with this ship started exactly where you are now, Keeper replied. The first pilot crashed into 3 different planets before he learned to fly in a straight line. The second pilot accidentally destroyed an entire moon during her first week. Jake looked around the control chamber with new eyes. The surfaces that had seemed impossibly alien a few minutes ago were starting to make sense. The displays weren't just random lights and symbols. They were showing him information about the ship's condition, its location, its capabilities. How many pilots have there been? Jake asked. 47 over the past 1,000 years, Keeper said. Each one different, each one special in their own way. But all of them shared the same essential quality, which is, they refused to give up. No matter how impossible the problem seemed, they kept trying until they found a solution. Jake thought about the broken air recycling unit he had fixed yesterday. According to the manual, that unit was beyond repair. But Jake had seen what it really needed and found a way to give it exactly that. "Show me how this works again," Jake said. For the next several hours, Keeper taught Jake the basics of controlling the Void Reaper. The ship was unlike anything humans had ever built. It didn't just fly through space. It seemed to dance with the forces of gravity and momentum, riding waves of energy that Jake couldn't see but could somehow feel. The weapons were equally amazing. The ship could fire beams that cut through solid matter like butter, or launch projectiles that could track targets across entire solar systems. But Jake was more interested in the other systems, the ones that seemed designed for building rather than destroying. "What are these?" Jake asked, pointing to a set of controls that looked like the tools in his personal kit. "Matter reconstruction systems," Keeper explained. "They can analyze any material and rebuild it into new configurations. The original builders used them for construction and repair work." "The original builders? You mean humans built this ship?" "Not the humans of your time. The first human civilization, the ones who reached the stars over 1,000 years ago, they built this ship as their greatest achievement. A vessel that could adapt to any challenge and solve any problem." Jake ran his hands over the controls, feeling their smooth surfaces. "What happened to them?" "They transcended," Keeper said simply. "They evolved beyond the need for physical form and joined with the energy of the universe itself. But before they left, they programmed me to watch over their descendants, to protect humanity and help them grow." While Jake learned about his impossible ship, the Catherian invasion fleet was moving closer to human space. Admiral Hamilton had managed to contact Earth Command, but the response was not encouraging. Earth's main fleet was dealing with pirate attacks in the outer colonies and couldn't return in time to help. "We're on our own," Amy Brooks told the Admiral. 47 ships against 230. Lisa nodded grimly. She had sent dozens of messages trying to contact the Void Reaper, but the legendary ship remained silent. Either it couldn't help, or it had decided that humanity wasn't worth saving this time. "Prepare our ships for battle," Lisa ordered. "If we're going to lose, we'll make them pay for every victory." Back on the Void Reaper, Jake was making progress. He could now fly the ship in mostly straight lines without accidentally destroying anything. He had even managed to land on a small moon without crashing, though the landing had been rougher than Keeper preferred. But Jake was getting frustrated with the ship's complexity. Every system had dozens of subsystems, and every subsystem had options and settings that seemed designed to confuse anyone who wasn't a genius. "There has to be a simpler way to do this," Jake muttered as he struggled with the navigation controls. The ship's designers believed in providing options for every possible situation, Keeper explained. "But half of these options don't make sense," Jake said. "Look at this weapons menu. Why would anyone want 17 different types of energy beams? You could do the same job with 3 or 4. Jake began experimenting with the ship's systems, not trying to master them as they were, but trying to understand what they were really for. He started connecting systems in ways that weren't in Keeper's manuals, combining tools that were meant to be used separately. "What are you doing?" Keeper asked when Jake began rewiring part of the matter reconstruction system. "Making it better," Jake said. "You've got all these amazing tools, but they're not talking to each other. It's like having a toolbox where every tool is in a different room." To Keeper's amazement, Jake's modifications worked. The weapon systems became more efficient. The navigation controls became more intuitive. Even the ship's engines ran smoother after Jake adjusted their power flow patterns. "How did you know to do that?" Keeper asked. Jake shrugged. "Same way I always fix things. I look at what's broken and figure out what it really needs. But these systems were not broken. They were functioning within normal parameters. Just because something works doesn't mean it can't work better, Jake said. My mom always said that there's no such thing as perfect, only good enough for now. As Jake worked, he began to understand something important about the Void Reaper. The ship wasn't just a weapon or a tool. It was a living example of human creativity, built by people who refused to accept limitations and designed to keep growing and improving forever. Keeper, Jake said, show me the invasion fleet. The control chamber filled with images of the Catherian warships. They were massive and powerful, armed with weapons that could crack planets and protected by shields that could stop anything humans had ever built. They outnumber humanity's fleet 5-1, Keeper said. Even with this ship's capabilities, a direct assault would be extremely dangerous. Jake studied the alien ships, looking for weaknesses, for problems that might need solving. The Catherians had built their fleet for overwhelming firepower and brute force. They were like a sledgehammer designed to crush anything in their path. But Jake had never solved problems with sledgehammers. He preferred more creative solutions. Keeper, Jake said slowly, those matter reconstruction systems you showed me. Could they work on alien ships? Theoretically, yes. But the Catherian ships are heavily shielded. You would need to get extremely close to affect their matter with our reconstruction beams. Jake smiled for the first time since coming aboard the ship. That's okay. I like working up close. Above them, the first Catherian scouts crossed into human space and began attacking the outer colonies. The invasion had begun, and humanity's only hope was a bumbling mechanic who was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had found the perfect job at last. The first human colony died at 800 hours Galactic Standard Time. New Perth, a mining settlement on the edge of human space, had 40,000 people when the Catherian advance scouts arrived. It had none when they left. Admiral Hamilton watched the reports come in with growing horror. The aliens weren't just destroying human ships and settlements. They were being methodical about it, wiping out every trace of human presence as they advanced toward Earth. They're not taking prisoners, Amy Brooks reported. Intelligence says Thexvar has ordered complete extermination. They want to erase humanity from the galaxy. Lisa felt sick. She had sent another dozen distress signals trying to reach the Void Reaper, but the ghost ship remained silent. Either it couldn't help or Jake Murphy was humanity's only hope, and Jake Murphy was working on broken toilets in the maintenance tunnels. At least, that's what Lisa thought. She had no idea that Jake was actually learning to pilot the most advanced warship in galactic history. Jake had spent the past 2 days making improvements to the Void Reaper's systems. What had started as simple modifications had grown into a complete redesign of how the ship operated. He had connected the weapon systems to the matter reconstruction tools, linked the navigation computers to the sensor arrays, and somehow managed to increase the ship's power output by 30%, using spare parts from the maintenance systems. I do not understand how this is possible, Keeper said as Jake finished installing his latest modification. These systems were designed by the most advanced civilization in galactic history. They were designed by engineers, Jake said, tightening a connection with a tool he had built from 3 different broken devices. Engineers think about what systems are supposed to do. I think about what they could do if you asked them nicely. Jake's changes had transformed the Void Reaper into something entirely new. The ship could now rebuild its own components while in flight, adapt its weapons to counter any defense, and analyze enemy technology faster than most civilizations could build it. But Jake's greatest innovation was something Keeper had never seen before. Jake had connected the ship's AI systems to the matter reconstruction tools, creating a feedback loop that let the ship learn from every modification Jake made. Show me the invasion fleet again, Jake said, the control chamber filled with tactical displays showing the Catherian armada. They had destroyed 6 more human colonies in the past day and were now moving toward the core systems where billions of humans lived and worked. Jake studied the alien ships, with the same concentration he brought to broken appliances. The Catherians favored massive vessels bristling with weapons and armor. Their largest battleships were 10 miles long and carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. But Jake wasn't looking at their strengths. He was looking for problems that needed fixing. Their ships are too big, Jake said finally. Too big? Keeper asked. Look at their power distribution systems. They're trying to run all those weapons and shields from central generators. That's like trying to power a whole city from one electrical outlet. No wonder they need ships the size of mountains. Jake began sketching modifications on the ship's holographic displays, showing Keeper what he meant. The Catherian ships were powerful but inefficient, built by a military culture that valued intimidation over practicality. I could fix that, Jake said thoughtfully. Fix their ships? Keeper sounded confused. But they are our enemies. That's just a matter of perspective, Jake said. Maybe they're only enemies because nobody's ever tried to help them solve their problems. Jake began preparing the Void Reaper for battle, but not in any way Keeper expected. Instead of charging weapons and raising shields, Jake was calibrating the matter reconstruction systems and programming new configurations into the ship's memory banks. What is your plan? Keeper asked. I'm going to do what I always do, Jake said. Fix things that are broken. When the Void Reaper finally appeared on the edge of the battle zone, the human defenders barely dared to hope. Admiral Hamilton had positioned her small fleet between the aliens and Earth, knowing they couldn't win but determined to make the Catherians pay for their victory. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Hamilton commanding the human defense fleet, Lisa broadcast to the mysterious black ship. Identify yourself. This is Jake Murphy aboard the Void Reaper, came the reply. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. Lisa nearly fell out of her command chair. Jake Murphy? The maintenance worker who couldn't fix a coffee machine without causing an explosion. That Jake Murphy was piloting humanity's most legendary warship? But there was no time to ask questions. The Catherian fleet was moving into attack formation, their massive battleships spreading out like a wall of death. War Marshal Thexvar's flagship, a monster called the Bone Crusher, led the advance. All human ships fall back to defensive positions. Jake's voice came over the communication channels. I'm going to try something new. Instead of engaging the Catherian fleet in conventional battle, the Void Reaper did something unprecedented. It flew directly toward the alien formation, not firing weapons but activating the modified matter reconstruction systems Jake had been working on. As the ship approached the first Catherian vessel, beams of energy reached out from the Void Reaper's modified tools, but instead of destroying the alien ship, the beams began changing it. Weapons turned into communication arrays. Armor plating became solar collection panels. Shield generators were converted into medical facilities. What is happening to my ships? War Marshal Thexvar demanded from his flagship. Jake's voice came over every communication channel in the fleet, speaking in perfect Catherian. Don't worry, they're not destroyed. Just improved. You had some serious design problems, so I fixed them. The Catherian crew of the modified ship found themselves unable to fight. Their weapons had been transformed into tools for research and exploration. Their ship's computer systems now contained vast libraries of scientific knowledge instead of tactical databases. This is impossible, Thexvar roared. Attack that ship. Destroy it immediately. But as more Catherian vessels moved to engage the Void Reaper, they too were improved by Jake's reconstruction beams. Warships became exploration vessels. Weapons platforms turned into space habitats. An entire battle fleet was transformed into a peaceful research expedition in less than an hour, Admiral. Hamilton watched in amazement as the most feared invasion force in Galactic history was systematically converted into something completely harmless. How is he doing this? Unknown, Amy Brooks replied, staring at her sensor readings. But whatever he's doing, it's working. The Catherian ships are completely disarmed. Jake continued his work methodically, flying the Void Reaper through the alien formation like a mechanic making house calls. Each ship he touched became better than it had been before. More efficient, more peaceful, more useful for scientific advancement than military conquest. You cannot do this, Thexvar broadcast on all frequencies. We are warriors. We do not explore or research or learn. Why not? Jake asked. You've got great ships and smart people. Seems like a waste to use all that for fighting when you could be discovering new worlds and making friends with interesting civilizations. As Jake worked, he found himself genuinely enjoying the challenge. The Catherian ships were well built but poorly designed, like tools that had been made by someone who didn't really understand what the tools were for. Each vessel Jake modified became a better version of itself, more capable and more efficient. This is not warfare, Keeper observed. This is artistry. Same thing, Jake said, concentrating on a particularly stubborn battleship that was resisting his modifications. War is just problem-solving with bigger explosions. By the end of the day, the entire Cytherian invasion fleet had been converted into an exploration and research armada. The aliens found themselves equipped with advanced scientific instruments, cultural exchange facilities, and communication systems designed to build friendships rather than destroy enemies. War Marshal Thexvar, watching his mighty fleet transformed into something unrecognizable, finally understood what humans truly were, not warriors to be defeated or prey to be conquered, but problem solvers who refused to accept that anything was beyond fixing. Even an ancient war between civilizations, apparently. War Marshal Thexvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at displays that made no sense. Where weapon status reports should have been, he saw readouts for atmospheric processors and botanical research labs. His tactical computers had been replaced with linguistic analysis programs and cultural exchange databases. "Restore my weapons," he roared at his crew. "We cannot, War Marshal," his chief engineer replied nervously. "The human has rebuilt our systems at the molecular level. Everything has been fundamentally changed." Thexvar's hands trembled with rage. For 40 years, he had been the Cytherian Empire's greatest military commander. He had conquered 17 star systems and enslaved a dozen alien species. Now, in a single day, one human with an impossible ship had turned his mighty fleet into a collection of peaceful research vessels. The human pilot requests permission to come aboard, his communications officer reported. "He wants to board my ship?" Thexvar asked. "Does he think I will surrender so easily?" "Actually," Jake's voice came through the communication system, "I was hoping to fix your environmental controls. My sensors show you've got some serious air quality problems over there." Thexvar looked around his bridge. The alien warrior was right. The Bone Crusher's life support systems had been malfunctioning for years, slowly poisoning the crew with recycled toxins. It was a problem every Cytherian ship dealt with, a sign of their military culture's focus on weapons over basic maintenance. "You mock me," Thexvar said. "No mocking," Jake replied, "just offering to help. Bad air makes people cranky, and cranky people make bad decisions. Maybe if your crew could breathe properly, we could have a reasonable conversation about all this." Against his better judgment, Thexvar found himself authorizing the human's request. Minutes later, a small shuttle detached from the Void Reaper and docked with the Bone Crusher. The shuttle bay doors opened, and Jake Murphy stepped out carrying a battered toolkit and wearing maintenance coveralls that had seen better days. Thexvar had expected the pilot of humanity's legendary warship to be an imposing warrior, someone who matched the Void Reaper's fearsome reputation. Instead, he found himself facing a young human who looked like he had just crawled out of an engine compartment. "You are the one who destroyed my fleet?" Thexvar asked. "Improved your fleet," Jake corrected, looking around the shuttle bay. "And I can see why you guys are always so angry. This place smells like a garbage disposal that's been broken for 6 months." Jake walked past the War Marshal and his guards as if they weren't there, heading toward the ship's engineering sections. Thexvar followed, confused by the human's casual attitude toward what should have been a tense military confrontation. "Your life support systems are completely backwards," Jake said as he examined the environmental controls. "You're trying to clean the air after it's already been breathed instead of preventing contamination in the first place. That's like trying to unburn toast." Jake opened his toolkit and began working on the Cytherian ship's systems. His tools looked primitive compared to the advanced technology around them, but somehow they seemed perfectly suited for the job. As he worked, Jake kept up a steady stream of conversation about pressure differentials and filtration efficiency. "Why are you doing this?" Thexvar demanded. "I came here to destroy your species." "Yeah, I noticed," Jake said, not looking up from his work. "But that was before I fixed your ships. Now you're explorers and researchers, not conquerors. Seems like a much better career choice, if you ask me." "I did not ask to be an explorer," Thexvar said. "I am a warrior. My people are warriors. We conquer and rule." "How's that working out for you?" Jake asked. "I mean, honestly, are you happy?" The question caught Thexvar off guard. Happiness wasn't something Cytherian warriors were supposed to think about. They were supposed to seek glory and honor and victory over their enemies. But if Thexvar was being honest with himself, he had to admit that 40 years of constant warfare had left him tired and empty. There was no satisfaction in conquering weaker civilizations, no real challenge in overwhelming primitive species with superior technology. "We do what we must," Thexvar said finally. "Or Jake said. You could do what you want instead. Jake finished his repairs and activated the new environmental systems. Clean, fresh air began flowing through the ship's corridors for the first time in years. Around the bridge, Catherian crew members took deep breaths and looked surprised at how much better they felt. There, Jake said, gathering his tools. That should take care of the breathing problems. You might want to check your food systems next. I saw some readings that suggest your nutritional processors are running about 40% below optimal efficiency. Wait, Thexvar said as Jake headed back toward his shuttle. That's it? You fix our air and leave? Pretty much, Jake said. Unless you want me to look at something else while I'm here. I noticed your artificial gravity is wobbling a bit. Thexvar stared at the strange human. You do not fear me, should I? Jake asked. You seem like a reasonable person who's been having some technical difficulties. Nothing wrong with that. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. For the first time in decades, Thexvar found himself genuinely curious about something. How did you transform our ship so completely? What kind of weapons do you possess? Weapons? Jake laughed. I don't have weapons. I have tools. The secret is knowing that every problem has a solution, even if it's not the solution you expected. Jake's shuttle returned to the Void Reaper, leaving Thexvar standing in a ship that smelled like a garden instead of a garbage dump. The War Marshal looked around his bridge, seeing his crew working with more energy than they had shown in months. Send a message to the Catherian High Command, Thexvar ordered. Tell them the invasion has been cancelled. Cancelled, War Marshal? His communications officer asked. What reason should I give? Thexvar thought about his conversation with the strange human mechanic. Tell them we have decided to pursue more productive activities. Over the following weeks, the transformed Catherian fleet began exploring the galaxy in ways they had never imagined. Their former weapons now served as advanced sensors for discovering new worlds. Their armor had become laboratories for studying alien life forms. Their soldiers found themselves working as diplomats and scientists instead of conquerors. Word of what happened spread throughout the galaxy faster than light itself. The story grew in the telling, becoming a legend that every civilization shared. Humans, the galaxy learned, were not just fighters or traders or explorers. They were fixers, people who looked at broken things and refused to accept that they couldn't be repaired. Even things that weren't obviously broken, like perfectly functional war fleets and ancient galactic conflicts, somehow became better after humans got involved. Jake Murphy returned to New Harmony and went back to work as a maintenance technician. Admiral Hamilton and the other military commanders never learned that their most important victory had been won by someone who officially spent his days fixing broken toilets. Ben Carter, Jake's supervisor, noticed that mechanical failures around the station had mysteriously decreased. Equipment that should have broken down continued working perfectly. Systems that had been problematic for years suddenly ran like clockwork. Murphy, Ben said one day, I don't know what you're doing differently, but keep doing it. Best maintenance record this station's ever had. Jake just smiled and continued humming his mother's old song as he worked. In the depths of space, the Void Reaper waited patiently for the next problem that needed solving. Keeper had learned something important from Jake. The best way to win a war wasn't always to destroy your enemies. Sometimes the best victory was helping them become something better than they were before. And across the galaxy, a new kind of legend began to spread. When civilizations spoke of humanity now, they didn't just mention human courage or human determination. They talked about the human ability to fix anything, to find solutions where others saw only problems, to turn enemies into friends with nothing more than patience, creativity, and a really good toolkit. It was the kind of reputation that made every species in the galaxy think very carefully before picking a fight with humanity. After all, you never knew when some random human might decide that your perfectly good empire could use a few improvements.